Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 16, Episode 114. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Wednesday, Steelers Nation. Happy NFL Draft Month, Dave. It is officially April 1st. No fooling here. The NFL Draft taking place in Pittsburgh just over 3 weeks from now. I know they're getting construction started downtown, and I think half the roads are closed now in downtown Pittsburgh. It's already a disaster to try to make it down there, but going to be a great time. Dave, we got plenty to talk about today. The owners' meetings are wrapping up. Heard from Mike McCarthy, Art Rooney, and Omar Khan. Some NFL draft news as well. So, jam-packed show. How you doing?
All right. Happy Wednesday. Happy April Fool's Day. The Bucks and the Pens both won yesterday. That's not an April Fool's joke either. So, yeah, it's draft month. Exciting time here. We got quite a bit to talk about here with the owners' meetings going on and Mike McCarthy having several interviews. I think Omar talked once. Art Rooney II spoke to the media for a little bit yesterday. So, yeah, we don't have a lack of things to talk about today.
So let's dive on in and we'll get this topic out of the way. The number one question McCarthy and Rooney and company fielded, of course, is Aaron Rodgers and his status. There is no finality. There is no answer. There is no official timeline. Art Rooney repeated what he had told Jerry Dulac over the weekend, that he expects an answer before and by the NFL draft. Now, what exactly is telling Rooney to expect an answer by then? I'm not quite sure. I know that I think Rooney made a comment that Rodgers had told him it would not take as long as last year to make a decision, which went until June, but what says it'll happen before April 23rd? I'm not quite there. So is this more deadline than timeline? How do you interpret Rooney's comments? McCarthy, by the way, mentioning that he has continued to have good conversations with Rodgers, spoke with him the night before. He had his media breakfast with reporters, and so those guys remain in constant communication.
I think the biggest thing to focus on is Art Rooney II saying, I expect his decision by the draft. So qualify that however you want to, but I mean, I think it's straight and to the point that when the big guy like that says I expect it by the draft, then I would think that they would expect it by the draft. And
is that a deadline? Do you view that as a deadline that Rooney is setting for Rodgers?
I think that's when Rooney's expecting it by. We can get into semantics here, I guess, but yeah, I would think that's no, I don't. We could get in how the conversations are going on behind the scenes. We need. Are they telling Aaron Rodgers, Aaron, we need your decision by the draft? I think that's plausible. I don't know. Have those words actually been muttered? I don't know, but it all adds up that at least logically you would hope and expect that to happen. But I mean, I think that's the most. I think what Art Rooney II said is the most concrete thing we've had to even maybe compare or designate as a potential deadline.
Really, of these last two offseason cycles, I don't believe Rooney made any comment last year. The closest he got was something to the effect of no timeline yet, but soon we'll need a decision on. And really that kind of was blown past. I think he made those comments in maybe March or April or something like that. And obviously nothing came until, nothing was official until June. So I don't know if those conversations have happened behind the scenes. We know when Aaron Rodgers spoke, what was that, maybe a month-ish ago on Pat McAfee's show, he said there was no deadline given by the team. So I think this is Rooney trying to put a little public pressure, a little public framing on Rodgers and his situation. My question is, if there is no decision by the draft, what are the consequences of that? Does Pittsburgh really plan to move on if Rodgers does not tell them before the draft? I don't get that inkling or intuition, and frankly, the draft and Rodgers are kind of separate plans. You can still draft a quarterback and scout quarterbacks and believe that Rodgers is going to come back. So I wonder what the teeth of that comment is from Rooney, but it is the most notable and concrete statement made by anybody throughout this process.
Look, he's coming back, right?
It still certainly seems that way given the constant communication between McCarthy and Rodgers.
I mean, I'm already to the point again that I hate talking about, the what if side of it there. But like, I mean, you, we talked about this several times. You got to know which way you're going to move forward here, for sure. And you know, look, the phase one opens up next week of the off season. You start getting things rolling, and McCarthy's talked about how basically, even he's not delivering the same playbook, so they're going to have to start getting things in line. There's been a lot of conversations, according to McCarthy, between Rodgers and himself so far. So all signs, it would be a huge shock at this point if Aaron Rodgers does not come back to the Steelers. I guess we want to focus in on the draft. What happens if Aaron Rodgers has not told the team that he's ready to make his decision at that point? Do they do they collectively say, look, if he's not here at this time, we're going to go out and say get Kirk Cousins or whoever you want, God forbid, that you want to add to that list there. I think we're just in the semantic stage here, but I mean, it is interesting in the sense that Art Rooney said, I expect his decision by the
Mhm.
draft.
Last thought and question on Rodgers, because I don't want to spend a ton of time on it because it's been talked about endlessly everywhere else. But how embarrassing would it be for Pittsburgh if there is no answer by the draft and Pittsburgh continues to hang on and wait around and show patience and doesn't matter if they are embarrassed because they keep saying it's coming soon. We're not going to wait as long as last year by the draft. And Rodgers seems to kind of keep pushing that timeline further and further back.
It's not a great look, when I was a kid driving around, if my old man said, if you don't shut up, I'm going to turn this car around, pull this car over, and wear your butt out. If he never did it, then I would keep pushing. I mean, it wouldn't look good on him because I would have become even more of a problem child than I already was,
Hmm.
at the time. So, I mean, would it look bad? Would the talk shows have even more fun with it? Yeah, they would. I mean, it's already on every NFL live anyway at this point, and will continue to be up until Aaron Rodgers makes the decision. We'll continue to get the should the Steelers do it? Should the Steelers wait this long? How bad do they look? So yeah, it would be a bad look if we get to the draft and there is no finality to yes or no Aaron Rodgers is coming back.
Agreed. And ultimately, I think Pittsburgh's calculation is even if we have to deal with the short term, not distraction, but storyline of the Rodgers saga, it'll be worth it if he comes back and gives us a quarterback option and plays reasonably well. I believe that is their calculation they made last year and the one they're making again this year.
Yeah, Aaron Rodgers will go down as quite the master of puppets at this point,
Yes.
based on uh, what all McCarthy has said up until this point. If he leaves them dangling this, as long as to the draft and even beyond, and then ultimately says, "Psych, I'm not coming. I'm retiring."
Or even if
Uh,
he comes back, it's still
yeah.
Rodgers clearly holds all the power and all the cards.
And he likes that. He probably likes that. He likes the whole league probably waiting on every next quote from whoever at this point. But look, it's going to happen. I mean, I said a while ago, and I haven't moved off to the 90% chance of him coming back. In fact, I'd probably put it at 98.9% now at this point. It just all the dialogue that it sounds like McCarthy and Rodgers have had up until this point, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when now.
Mhm. Yeah, I think my percentage has bumped up from 60-40 to 75-80%
That
plus. It's
low still,
probably
huh?
you think it's still low? I mean, it's a jump for me. So you just never know with Aaron Rodgers. You can never know until you know for sure once he puts pen to paper because he certainly does march to his own beat. But less so even from Rooney. McCarthy keeps kind of saying he's in a really good place, good conversations, giving the sly smile a lot over the last week or so, which certainly tells you he knows a little something something.
Maybe Arian's testing them too to see how much leaks come out.
You never know. All right, moving on to another Steelers quarterback in Will Howard, and Mike McCarthy continuing to sing his praises and the potential that Will Howard has, and said that last year, had McCarthy been the Steelers head coach in 2025, Will Howard would have never made it to the 6th round because he would have drafted him earlier than that. How much of that is just kind of smoke and just kind of yapping, or how much of that is real? We'll find out. But McCarthy continues to talk about the potential of Will Howard.
Well, I wouldn't imagine throughout all this process, Mike McCarthy saying, I don't look forward to working with Will Howard. But within that, I know people say there's a lot of coach speak going on here. Mike McCarthy's been around this league a long time. He knows what to say, what not to say. All that said, this has been a constant theme from him from day one. I look forward to working with Will. I mean, right from the first press conference and on. And I can't see him trying to just give the media some sound bites, specifically at the coach's breakfast and on the McAfee show the other day. I genuinely think that Mike McCarthy believes all that he has said about Will Howard. I think that he believes he can potentially be a starting quarterback in the NFL. I believe the fact that he was probably higher than obviously what the league ended up being, where the league ended up being on Will Howard last year in the draft, ultimately drafted in the 6th round. All it takes is one coach to take him higher, or one organization to take Will Howard higher than that. I'm using it as a springboard into saying, yeah, my evaluation on Will Howard was kind of justified because I had him as a 3rd or 4th round pick. I mean, obviously you can't be a revisionist of history and go back and change things at this point. He was drafted in the 6th round, and he was drafted after guys like Gabriel and obviously Shadur Sanders, and a few more guys even went ahead of Will Howard, who I didn't think would go ahead of Will Howard. But I really believe that Mike McCarthy is really looking forward to getting his hands on Will Howard starting next week here. And whatever that becomes, we'll see. I think Will Howard has. I think Will Howard really embraced Aaron Rodgers last year. I think in a vacuum, Will Howard is hoping that Aaron Rodgers comes back for one more season so he can get another year of tutelage underneath him. I think McCarthy, Aaron Rodgers, and Will Howard in the same room will be good, really, for all three of those guys involved there. But I believe everything Mike McCarthy appears to be trying to selling when it comes to Will Howard and his potential future moving forward into his young career.
Yeah, I think it's well documented how much potential McCarthy thinks Howard has. I thought what was interesting to kind of add on to that is where Howard can improve and grow. If McCarthy is going to be this quarterback whisperer and developer, then how do you develop Will Howard? And McCarthy touched on that a little bit in his meeting with the media. He says, quote, you talk about his throwing motion, some things throwing the ball. There's a lot of growth with his feet. The challenge I see in college football, it's so scheme heavy. There's not a lot of training in the footwork. There's room for development there. So just kind of one small and maybe new comment about how to make Howard a better player. And McCarthy certainly very mechanically inclined. I think I found that one coaching clinic he did shortly after he was hired by Green Bay in 2006. And he said there's basically almost no quarterback whose mechanics I never kind of tweaked and messed with and adjusted, except for maybe Brett Favre was the one exception to the rule because he was established and he was Brett Favre. So he messed with Aaron Rodgers. Throwing mechanics, remember Rodgers would hold the ball up super high around his helmet. That's how that was taught at Cal. He brought it down to a much more natural, comfortable in the chest. And so I'm sure Howard will get the same treatment. So obviously McCarthy high on Howard, at least he said so publicly, but I thought the comments about how Howard can get better was more interesting this time.
Yeah, he said, needs to be able to play from the pocket, right? I think that was one takeaway there, and he talked about 2-minute football, and so I would expect that to be a lot of the focus along with the footwork there. He talked about how all these, the schemes of college football and how kind of there's less, detail, I guess, or coaching when it comes from playing from the pocket and working more on footwork. And he talked about, Aaron Rodgers, and just look at Aaron and kind of the way he torques and lower body. So yeah, I would imagine those would be part of the whole McCarthy quarterback school there. So look, once again, I believe him in what he has said about Will Howard right from the get go, and I think he's really looking forward to getting his hands on him starting next week.
And sort of part and parcel with that is the quarterback coach who is staying. Tom Arth, one of only two holdovers in terms of the coaches from the Mike Tomlin era. Scott McCurley, McCarthy's longtime friend, the other. And McCarthy talked about the importance of the continuity between quarterback and quarterback coach, especially for a young guy like Will Howard. And McCarthy spoke highly of Tom Arth, who he once coached in Green Bay when Tom Arth was playing quarterback coming out of John Carroll and bouncing around, was Peyton Manning's backup for couple seasons, but spent time, an off season at least, with Aaron Rodgers and McCarthy in Green Bay. And so McCarthy was happy to keep Tom Arth around and says he has a bright future in the NFL.
Yeah, and look, McCarthy obviously had every opportunity to switch out every member of the coaching staff had he wanted to. So obviously had the ties back to Arth, and we know Aaron Rodgers and how he feels about Arth, and it made sense to have continuity, especially when McCarthy knows the history of Arth and knows the importance of quarterback coach to young quarterbacks, especially there. So it all made sense that Arth remained on this staff, and for at least another season. And yeah, I think he spoke highly of Arth, and also the Steelers' new OC as well too, and Brian.
Yeah, Brian Angelico talked about working with him in the past and just having a guy that'll be in a really important role. Even though Angelico's not going to be calling the plays, that'll be McCarthy's duty. There's still a really important role for Angelico to play throughout the week in terms of helping to run meetings and coordinate things, because McCarthy's going to get pulled in a lot of different directions as the head coach naturally. And so there'll be times, I know McCarthy cited, where they're working together in the room and McCarthy has to get pulled out for something else that's happening and Angelico has to finish up the meeting. So from an organization standpoint, game planning standpoint, study standpoint, that's all going to be, falling into Angelico's job description. And so that role is going to be really important, even though it may not always and won't manifest itself in terms of Angelico calling the plays on game day. So there's still a really important role for Angelico to have in this offense.
All right, let's stay on the quarterback theme and everything that Mike McCarthy has said about quarterbacks so far, the last few interviews here. And we can, I guess, kind of tie that into the quarterbacks that have either come in or are coming in.
Yeah, we know one new quarterback expected to visit the team sometime this month. We don't have the exact date on this, but reportedly, and that came from, I want to make sure I get the right source on this. This was Bo. Twitter is so bad at trying to search Twitter accounts. I got to make sure I get things right. Who was it, Dave? Who had the report on that? Bo.
Show, or I know you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Marchiante, I think I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah.
I apologize for saying that wrong, but I just want to give the credit where credit is due. He reported that Arkansas quarterback Taylon Green is going to visit the Steelers for one of his 30 visits. Green has a couple visits coming up, Pittsburgh being one of them. So of the other two that we know have either happened or will happen, they both have happened already. And Carson Beck from Georgia, Cole Payton from North Dakota State, now add Taylon Green to that list of quarterback visits.
All right, looking at Cole Payton, 6'2", 5'8", 232, 10 1/4 hands. Looking at Carson Beck, 6'4", 3/4, 233, 10 hands. And Taylon Green, 6'5", 7'8", 227 pounds, 9 7/8. A lot of bigger boys there, and specifically lobster crackers.
That's not a coincidence or an accident. McCarthy talked about having big quarterbacks, and Omar Khan's talked about having AFC North quarterbacks, which he did not define, but you can reasonably interpret as big, strong, tough, can handle the elements, the cold, the snow, all that kind of stuff. It's pouring in Pittsburgh right now, just as one example of how the weather changes so quickly. Tornadoes last night, rain today, probably snow tomorrow. So talked about Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre having 10+ inch hands and big bodies, kind of traditional pocket passer mold, even though, of course, Rodgers and Favre were mobile as well. So you had Peyton and Beck, the only quarterbacks at the combine to weigh over 230 pounds and have 10+ inch hands. Green, also a very big guy. His body type is much different than Peyton or Beck. Green is a lot lankier and taller and skinnier overall, but he certainly has size and an interesting prospect to work with, kind of a project like Cole Payton. Although Green has much more experience, you wonder how much more his game can grow.
Gonna go out on a limb here and say I don't think the Steelers are gonna draft Diego Pavia out of Vanderbilt.
The 5'11", 190-pound probably kid.
And then you look at a guy that's a lot of people trying to link to the Steelers early in this draft as well too, and Ty Simpson, 6'1", 1/8, 9 3/8. You know, the hand size isn't overly bad when it comes to him, but I think when you look at just his overall length and all, yeah. I don't think now, based on what McCarthy has said, I don't find it a huge surprise that now it'll be interesting to see if maybe people got on you the other day. Why aren't you missing? Why aren't you mentioning Drew Aller in the post that you write? Yeah, I think you had 5 or 6 comments in
I had
there.
so many comments about
You
that.
you are purposely leaving off Drew Aller. Well, the reason that you did not mention him because it was more focused about, or it was focused on the quarterbacks that had been brought in at the time
Mhm.
there. So, yeah, will it be interesting to see if Drew Aller is brought in to kind of round this thing out, being as how he is 6'5" and a quarter. 228, 9 7/8 inch hands. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see. But you weren't trying to slight Drew Aller by not mentioning him. I just want to get that out there.
Right. The focus of the article was on the two quarterbacks who had come in for visits at the time of that publication. That was before we knew about Green. So it was about Beck and about Cole Payton. I did not mention any other quarterback in the draft other than those two names. So the focus was just on who they've looked at so far that we could directly tie that into. Does Aller fit that mold as the AFC North quarterback of the size and the build and the overall physique? Absolutely. So could he be in contention? Yes, but my point was just looking at the two quarterbacks who had been brought in Beck and Peyton, their size, and clearly Pittsburgh is not going to draft another Kenny. And I think also with Kenny Pickett, smaller guy, hand size, which may have been overblown, but when a guy fails, you tend to kind of go in the other direction. So when a guy like Pickett fails, which he failed for many reasons, some his fault, some I think the team's fault, you go in the other direction. You go for that bigger guy. You draft Will Howard last year. He certainly has the AFC North mold type, and you look at Beck and Peyton and Aller potentially, and Green has an interesting build. So those guys are all checking that bigger box.
All right, a few probably about 2 weeks ago, you asked me. I think this it was after Beck came in, and then obviously Cole Payton I think came in after him. But I think at the time of Beck, you said, what do you make about what do you make of the Steelers bringing in the quarterback? And I said, I'm going to have to. I think my response was something like, I'm going to have to see a little bit more evidence and all over the next couple of weeks here to form a different opinion about whether or not I think this team will draft a quarterback. Based now, here we are 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, whatever the time frame has been. I think it is becoming more apparent at this point that the Steelers do indeed have interest in drafting a quarterback at some point during this draft. It feels like more of a day 3 sort of kid at this point, but this team still obviously until they don't has 12 picks on the board here. Mike McCarthy, it feels like, would like to have another young arm to work with to go along with potentially Rodgers, Mason Rudolph, and Will Howard. So yeah, I'm almost resigned to the fact now of thinking that this team will indeed draft a quarterback at some point, and we'll see, obviously, if Drew Aller is brought in at some point, or if this list grows, and if indeed Taylor Green goes in. But I mean, we've had the breadcrumbs so far that at least have led us to the reasonings behind Carson Beck, Taylor Green, and Cole Payton coming in at this point. Then you match that up with a lot of the things that Mike McCarthy has said so far. It, yeah, I'm to the point now where I'm more than likely going to have a quarterback in my mock draft.
And even though it leaves the question and begs the question, maybe I should say, of how do all the pieces fit? Who is odd man out? You assume Rodgers comes back. You have Will Howard. You assume he makes it. The draft pick likely to make it if that's fourth round or above. And of course, you have Mason Rudolph, who doesn't last, who won't be on the roster. And Rudolph would obviously probably be the first name you look at. But as I've said before, we've had this conversation, you never know what could happen. Will Howard gets hurt in camp last year, begins on IR. Skylar Thompson makes it as a number 3 instead. You never know what happens throughout an entire preseason and training camp experience. And McCarthy even made the comment, speaking with reporters, that he would love to have 5 quarterbacks on the roster. He's kind of pushed the NFL to have some sort of system where you can maybe have quarterbacks count separately against the roster. He didn't detail it in this sense, but kind of that's, I think, what he was trying to get at overall was some sort of specialty carve out for quarterbacks, because it is such an important position, because the position is not developed well in college and probably not even developed as well as it should be at the NFL level. And so could there be a scenario in which you keep 4 quarterbacks, crazy as that may sound, for a team that doesn't have a long-term answer, for a team that should be stockpiling at the most important position in all the sports? You just never know. So I still think there's a path where they could take a quarterback even if they believe Rodgers is going to come back, or even if he tells them he's going to be back by the time the draft rolls around.
Look, I'm not to the point. I just got myself to this hump where I think they might draft one now.
I don't want to push you too far.
Don't. I'll see it when I believe it. That's where I'm at the point of this team keeping 4 on the 53-man roster. But we know this team likes taking 4 quarterbacks to camp, right?
Sure.
And I do still struggle with the fact of seeing this team get to the point, potentially, let's say they do draft one. And look, if you spend anything more than a 7th round draft pick on a quarterback, it feels like that quarterback, barring something happening, injury wise or something like that, is more than likely going to be on this 53-man roster. I guess where I'm really struggling is, what is this team really okay with the end result being Aaron Rodgers and 2 essential rookies on the roster? That's the biggest thing that I'm struggling with. Now, look, until Mason Rudolph is not on this roster, he's on this roster, obviously. But could you get to, and I don't think it would be wise to draft a quarterback and then during the draft trade Mason Rudolph away. But could you get to a point where you're around final cut downs around the league and Mason has maybe some value as a backup at another organization? Could you ultimately see Mason not cut but flipped for 5th or 6th, or a swap of a 6 and a 6? You know how it goes.
Sure. Someone loses a backup quarterback
right.
in camp, needs it. Yeah, I could see
Right.
that.
And then you go back to Ben Roethlisberger's rookie season, where the talk was that Ben's going to be the number 3. The plan is Ben to be the number 3 quarterback on this roster, and you had Charlie Batch go down with a knee issue, and by the start of the season, and then 2 weeks into the season, you lose your starter in touchdown Tommy, and lo and behold, there's Ben Roethlisberger, your starter there. So that's all just a long way of saying, okay, I'm resigned to the fact of this team drafting a quarterback. I do not believe they will draft one in the first 3 rounds, but I think at this point, beyond that, I guess we should expect it to happen.
I think we'll see. I think there's certainly a good chance of that. I think the conversation for drafting a quarterback begins in the 3rd round, maybe not with that burst of 3 third-round picks, but maybe with the 2nd or the 3rd one at number 99, where maybe a Cole Payton or Beck or Aller or maybe even a Taylor Green makes some sense. I've talked about 3rd round seems to be the spot where teams will take some developmental guys, whether that's Jalen Milroe last year to Seattle, or Hendon Hooker a couple of years ago, or Malik Willis during that draft class, where you kind of feel like that's where you can start taking that project type of a guy, where a Cole Payton, maybe a Taylor Green would fit. They're interesting because they're all different quarterbacks. They have the commonality of size, Green, Payton, and Beck, but they're all different styles and different parts and paths of their career. We've talked about Beck, talked about Payton. What are your thoughts, if any, on Taylor Green?
Yeah, you want to talk about one that really would be a developmental one? I mean, he's definitely got some athletic traits to him, and can make plays out of structure and all. But I just think he's very erratic with his passing. He needs a good quarterback school such as Mike McCarthy. So of Beck, Peyton, and Taylor Green, Green to me is the most developmental one of the group. A lot of good traits in there. A little bit different build as you talked about too. And in fact, I think what Green is the tallest of the bunch, but is one of the thinnest of the bunch as well too. But he's also one of the fastest as well too. So and most athletic. I kind of view him as really a sixth or seventh round draft pick at this point. But I think of the three that potentially are going to end up being on the visitor list, and obviously we'll wait and see what happens with Drew Aller. Aller obviously doesn't, is a lot more experienced, as is Carson Beck there. But I would phrase Taylor Green as the one that would need the most development.
I think Peyton would still need the most development as a one-year starter coming from North Dakota State, but Green is certainly not day one ready. My issue with Green is despite all the physical tools and traits, and from an athletic, just pure athlete standpoint, he's maybe the most athletic quarterback to ever appear at the NFL Combine. He ran 4.37. His numbers were just insane, but quarterback position is so much more than just a 40 time and how fast are you. His pocket presence was the big issue for me on tape, him bailing on clean pockets and going backwards. Some of the stuff that Shedeur Sanders was doing last year. Now Green is more athletic and can kind of write those checks a little more often than Shedeur could, but that's not going to work at the NFL level. But my overall concern with Green was there are some of those things that needs to be developed. But he started, man, how many 40 plus games? He acts like he's a 1 year starter, but he's been playing for a long time. Was at Boise State and then transferred to Arkansas. And so you kind of wonder, these bad habits, are they sort of ingrained in him, and can you really fix it? Or is it kind of, he is who he is? At least with Cole Payton as a 1 year guy with not much of a resume, you feel like you can probably, still have a lot of time to work on things. With Green, it's kind of the worst of both worlds, where he's got a lot to develop, but he's also started a bunch of games. So you would expect his career to be further along. Now, did he not get good coaching? Was he just playing in a tough situation at Arkansas and the SEC? Some of that may be true, but you kind of wonder how much more is there really to tap into.
Well, you go back to what McCarthy said too about quarterbacks having to play within the pocket. And that's going to be one of the toughest things I think for him. Now, Cole Payton, I know, has got a little bit of that as well too, wanting to bail and take off with the football. But yeah, look, you're not drafting Taylor Green to play any snaps for you, obviously, during his rookie season. So what
Sure.
you're trying to do is run him through the quarterback school, seeing if you can coach him up and put, let's be realistic here. Can you make a backup quarterback out of him?
Well, I think you could try to use Taylor Green. I mean, he'd be number 3 quarterback in all likelihood, but there's the rushing element that would be interesting in some sort of sub-package look. The way you see, it's kind of like Milrow in Seattle, where they used him in the occasional short yardage wildcat type of situation last year. Could you try to do the same with Green, where obviously if Aaron Rodgers is your starting quarterback, or even if it's Rudolph or Will Howard, Green's far more athletic than any of those guys. But yeah, 46 starts overall, and he got benched for his final game against Missouri this past year for the Razorbacks, which kind of tells you where his career is at. So, interesting guy. My comp for him was Vince Young, not the Texas prospect, but just the actual career NFL-wise of Vince Young, where there were some really impressive moments, but a lot of roller coaster moments with him, and ultimately just never worked out in the long term. So even a position change with Taylor Green's not the craziest idea. Now he's rejected that, and he's going to stick at quarterback first, but there's just a lot to work with Taylor Green.
And look, if you draft him, make him your number 3, he's not going. He's at best he's going to be the emergency quarterback, so he's not going to be able to get into a game.
Sure.
Barring your top 2 going down. So
yeah, it's just again one of those guys that you wonder how much more he can grow, and you wish you had the quarterback school. Unfortunately, McCarthy can't actually have the true quarterback school anymore because of NFL rules and restrictions. Everyone now has private quarterback coaches and that kind of stuff, but you can just take them only through what the CBA allows. But Green, he's older, he's going to be 24, he's engaged, he started almost 50 games, and yet there's still a lot to work with his game. So there's interesting traits and tools, no question. You just, again, wonder how much better he can get.
All right, if this team does bring in, and we're assuming Green indeed ultimately comes in to make the list 3, if this team does bring one more in, it's more than likely going to be Drew Aller, right?
You would think. I mean, who else fits the mold as the big quarterback in this year's
I
draft?
guess Aguilar, I guess, out of Tennessee,
Yeah,
maybe.
Joey Aguilar. Yeah, he just threw at his pro day yesterday. Who else on that list? I mean, I just did the report on Jacob Clark from Missouri State, who's 6'5", 230, 10-inch chance. Now, he's a 7th-round guy, undrafted guy, but if you want to talk about just the size profile, he would fit.
All right. We'll see how that plays out the rest of the way, but it is interesting that the 3, once again, the 3 that we're assuming will be on the final visitor list all match up with what McCarthy has said about, build and hand size, and needing, a fairly good amount of development.
Dave, it's not just size at quarterback McCarthy's interested in. He likes it across all his positions, and he talked about the free agent group that was brought in. He says he likes playing styles and physical profiles, and that certainly fits with basically every free agent addition this team made, whether that was the trade for Michael Pittman Jr. or signing Rico Dowdle or signing Jaquan Brisker or Sebastian Joseph Day. The list goes on and on. Jamel Dean, obviously at cornerback. These are big guys, physical guys, and think McCarthy has a clear type he's looking for.
Yeah, he does, and I think our Ross McCorkle drilled down the wide receivers that Mike McCarthy has drafted.
That was Jeremy. Jeremy Pike.
Jeremy. Apologies, Jeremy Pike. Good job on that. I just for a quick and dirty this morning, went to Summer Sports and asked their AI machine, which is dangerous to do, but I have asked that same AI machine a few recent questions, some of which I think we're going to write about here pretty soon. But when it comes to, I think, air yard distance and explosive plays and things of that nature. But look forward to that, kind of plug that ahead of time. I asked it to look at the wide receivers that Mike McCarthy has drafted and come up kind of with an average height and weight and 40 times speed for him. Now, this is just loose. I have not double checked the results. I did not have time enough this morning to do that. So shame on me. So take this for whatever you want to, for what you want it to be. But it tells me that the average height of a Dallas Cowboys 5 wide receivers drafted under Mike McCarthy was 6'1.5". Average weight 203.4 pounds with an average 40 time of 4.51 seconds. Now, during his long span at Green Bay, 2006 to 2018, interesting enough, this machine tells me average height was again 6'1.5". Average weight 203.8 pounds, so only slightly heavier during his time in Green Bay. And once again, the average 40 time 4.5 seconds. So
Okay. Pretty
uh
much dead on both, pretty much identical.
they are scarily. Now I also asked it hand size as well too. But it did not have an answer for me on that. Now, obviously, you're going back to 2006. So, what I plan on doing is looking at the hand size on these kids as well too, and trying to find an average of all that. So, basically, what I'm going to do is take Jeremy's study. I'm going to drill it down a little bit further. I might look at, unfortunately, we're not going to have all the kind of the short shuttles, I'm sure, and the 3 cones, but try of those that are potentially listed, even if they were pro day instances. Maybe try to round that out a little bit more there. But I mean, just looking at this off the cuff, it's hard to ignore uh, the 3 main elements here, right? 6'1.5", 203, roughly 203 pounds and 40 times of really no greater than 4.51, right? So when we look at this year's crop and more specifically, I guess at the top wide receivers of the class and ones that we think the Steelers might be interested in, how far under are we willing to go under, let's say 6 foot? Because you got guys like obviously Omar Cooper that are right at 6 foot and 1/8. 199 pounds. You got a guy like Casey Concepcion, 5'11" and 5'8", 196 pounds. So both those guys are technically, I guess, under the threshold, right? Of both those key measurements of height and weight. Whereas if you look at a guy like Denzel Boston, 6'3", 5'8", 212 pounds. Who else is kind of in that first round talk that we've talked about? Jacoby Lane I don't know, or I would more call him first or second round.
Yeah, his teammate Mekhi Lemon's probably the first round
Yeah.
USC receiver.
5'11", 1'8", 192 pounds. Once again, a little slighter. Now you look at more of a second round guy, third round guy, and Elijah Surratt, 6'2" and a half, 210 pounds. He easily qualifies in that category. Obviously, Cornell Tate, a little slight at 192 pounds, but did he drop weight to run? But even his 40 time was 4.53 officially. So that would, that's a box not checked there. You look at a guy like Jordan Tyson, who did not run out of Arizona State, but comes in 6'2", 1'8", 203, almost right in the wheelhouse right there, right? So I want to look at hand size as well too. I'm going to drill this down a little bit further, but you look at Jeremy Bernard though, 6'1" and a quarter, 206 pounds. So he's right there in that wheelhouse, right? And they have even brought him in for a visit, and his 40 time was officially 4.48. I guess of all the guys that I just ran down who could potentially be first or second round guys, Bernard, Boston. Who else did I mention in there? That fit,
A Surratt.
a Surratt, and if you want to be technical about it, I guess you would have to exclude Omar Cooper Jr. and Casey Concepcion.
Yeah, but that's just the average, and it's important to look at it. But you've got guys above and below. I think the question's less about being so technical and legalistic within 0.2 of or 0.02 of a second or 5 pounds here, but who are the real outliers that just may not make sense? And maybe a guy like Concepcion, both in build and just overall looking at his stature and makeup, may not fit. We talked about Zachariah Branch on the Monday live stream. Maybe that's a guy that, maybe you're right, just isn't going to be part of Pittsburgh's plan because he's just such an outlier across the board at under 5'9", $177, that historically not guys that Mike McCarthy has drafted. In Jeremy's study, he noted only 2 receivers had been under 6 foot drafted under McCarthy, be it in Green Bay or Dallas. Now, they ended up being 2 good players in Greg Jennings and Randall Cobb, but there's still been the exception more so than the rule. So I'm not going to exclude an Omar Cooper just because of that average, but it may exclude some of the outliers, the real shorter guys like a Zachariah Branch. All
right, Shrine Bowl guy that they've brought in, Jeff Caldwell, matches 6'4", 3/4, 216 pounds. So and he ran 4.31, so he's more than qualified. Now, obviously, what I don't view Caldwell as a second round guy. I don't know. You will see how the wide receivers come off the board. I kind of view him more as a third or fourth round guy at this point. But and then you got Bryce Slants out of North Dakota State, 6'3", 3/8", 204. Ran 4.34. He's definitely in that category of measurements here. But to get so hyper focused that we're throwing guys out with the bathwater because they're 5'11" or 5 pounds slight, it's not smart to do. But the main takeaway is McCarthy likes the bigger wide receivers, and he likes them also to be versatile as well too. I think that's one huge takeaway that from day one that Mike McCarthy has stated is, he just doesn't want a guy that's just going to be a Z. That doesn't just want a guy that's just going to be an X or just a guy that's going to be an F. He's going to want these guys to be interchangeable, and I think that he's made that pretty clear.
And not just that wide receiver, but across the board. He had mentioned at some point during that coach's breakfast about the offensive line and needing versatility, and it's rare you go through an entire season with just the same 5. I think he was intimating that's never happened to him before. I'd have to check that, but I assume it's probably true or pretty darn close. And so you need guys who can play multiple positions. So we talk about, offensive linemen who's got versatility, experience playing maybe both guard spots and center. They signed Brock Hoffman, who can play all three spots along the interior. So that's also a factor. McCarthy certainly made it a point. He values positional flexibility.
Yeah, he likes those guys to be able to play two positions at least, whether that be, say a wide receiver moving around, or maybe a wide receiver that can play a certain spot plus play on special teams, and really the same as a running back. He talked about how Warren and Rico Dowdle are both three down running backs, and kind of branching off into other things McCarthy has said. Talking about Caleb Johnson, and he understands the issues that he had on special teams last year. But one of the main focuses on him is for him to be to develop more into a three down player. And in the meantime, he might have to make himself useful on special teams as well too.
Yeah, here's the comment from McCarthy on Caleb Johnson. He says, quote, "I'm aware of their past experience, but this is like a Catholic operation. Everybody's got a clean slate. Let's just get to work. You have to do that with young guys. So I'm looking forward, and I understood what happened on special teams," referring to the kickoff gaff last year. So I've heard all that, but he's a young man that obviously his draft value is what we think of him. I'm going to challenge him to be a three down player, challenge him to be a special teams player. All those things are part of being a young running back in this league. And McCarthy separately and also just talked about liking three down running backs, guys that can pass protect, guys you don't have to take off the field in passing situations. It'll keep your playbook open to kind of run whatever you want to call, no matter who's on the field. So that'll be Johnson's aim. He'll have to show he can do the things he struggled in last year, which was pass protect, catch the ball, and contribute on special teams.
All right. Anything else to add on the wide receiver talk? Once again, yeah, I don't want to take up 30 minutes talking about height, weight, but obviously big receivers and or bigger receivers and those that can move around. And I think we have a good baseline of kind of what he looks for when it comes to height, weight, speed type guys.
Sure. He's not hiding that at all and spoke pretty transparently about it, so I can appreciate that. And also, similarly, just one last note on receivers, not size related, but Roman Wilson, same thing as Caleb Johnson, excited for him, was impressed talking to him. McCarthy said of his conversations with Roman Wilson, says there's a lot of love in the building for Roman. It's another guy that has a lot to prove, but will be given that chance to prove it.
Yeah, I liked what he said about those younger guys. Something mixed into Catholic Church about say a couple Hail Marys, Our Fathers, and move along, right? In other words, fresh, clean slate with these guys moving forward with them.
Which is the right approach to have, no question about it. And so we talk about these guys, Johnson and Wilson. We've never said they have no chance to make it in Pittsburgh. They're done, but it is a clean slate, which works in the sense of you're starting fresh, but it also means you have a lot to prove, and you got to prove it, and you have to do so in a hurry. You have this summer, the training camp practices, maybe a joint practice or two. Pittsburgh gets one in there, and 3 exhibition games to show it. So what do you have to do? You got to be highly conditioned. You better be healthy. You can't be missing time. That's a bad impression to make here on a new coaching staff as they start making decisions and building the roster in their vision. And of course, you got to go out there and execute and be consistent day after day, doing that in practice and then in stadium.
All right, pre-draft process with Mike McCarthy. A couple of notes there, and we talked the other day on the show about at some point will Mike McCarthy be asked about his pro day trek. And I don't know if he was specifically asked about that, but there was an answer given that my plan was to go to 6 pro days this year, and basically some other things got in the way there, and I only made it to 1. So at least we know for a fact that he indeed only has gone to 1 so far. Now the Indiana Pro Day is today, so and things are slowing down at the owners' meetings. It'll be interesting to see if Omar Khan and Mike McCarthy get away to go to the Indiana Pro Day today. So what are those other things? I was thinking about this last night. Is there any chance that over the last couple of weeks specifically that Aaron Rodgers snuck himself over to Pittsburgh and said, "I'm coming. You guys be ready." And they had to say him and Omar had to cancel their plans to sit with Aaron Rodgers on Water Street there. Is there any chance such a thing has happened?
You like talking about not putting things in absolutes and saying 0% chance, but if he came to Pittsburgh, why didn't he sign a contract then?
maybe just wanted to fill things out.
What is there to feel out? It's Mike
Uh,
McCarthy and Omar
you
Khan.
know, I mean, you know how Aaron did Aaron sign a contract the last time that he came
Yeah, but
in?
that was his first visit. So
Okay.
he wanted to get to know Mike. He didn't know Mike Tomlin. He didn't know Omar Khan. He didn't know Art Rooney. I mean, there's nothing to really get to know. I mean, he could have just called him and said, "Hey, I'm coming. I'm not gonna sign right away, but I'll be there." I mean, you could have done that instead of flying out from California to Pittsburgh.
Aaron, all bets are off the table when Aaron Rodgers is concerned.
Yeah, I know.
I'm
I
not
get it.
saying. I'm
You're
just
just
saying.
saying. But
Uh,
even to that, okay, why did you make the other 4 pro days?
sure,
You know, the
sure.
one I was the celebration of life. I think that was going to be a conflict. But you know, what were the other pro days he wanted to go to? I wish he would have at least said that. He kind of made the comment in passing on his own volition on the Pat McAfee show, and what is happening that's preventing you from. Now maybe there was something serious, and I'm not trying to be hypercritical here, but I just wonder what was so important that prevented him making a bunch of pro days.
Yeah, look, I mean, we could try to go down a rabbit hole and uh come up with maybe his maybe one of his kids got an fender bender, or you just never know, like Jake said in the Blues Brothers, I ran out of gas, I had a flat tire, I didn't have enough money for cab fare. My tux didn't come back from the cleaners. An old friend came in from out of town. Someone stole my car. There was an earthquake, a terrible flood, locust. It wasn't my fault. I swear to God. Who knows what the reason was for there? But I mean, it could be a lot of different things. But I'm not making excuses for him, but it is, that's where my mind went outside of it. I can understand maybe a couple of maybe back-to-back pro days. Let's say Aaron was in town, if indeed that happened, but and maybe that canceled him out for one or two, and maybe the whole Harlan thing. What went on? He was supposed to be. What was the pro day? Was it the Notre Dame pro day that was going on when the Harlan thing was going on?
Trying to think because it was the erroneous report about him being there, but it was Mark Sadowski. What pro day was that? It was a quarterback throwing. LSU, was it the LSU pro
Yeah,
day?
that was an LSU one where Sadowski was there. I don't know. It was one of like Alabama or Notre Dame or something. One of those was going on. Then we had the whole Ohio State of whether or not they were indeed on the credentialed list, and obviously they didn't show up on that. I mean, who knows the reasons why? I mean, what this means is we're going to have to be continued next year to see the whether or not we should, whether or not Mike McCarthy shows up. But if one couldn't go for whatever reasons, why couldn't Omar go?
That's what
Or
I was going to ask. Has Omar Khan ever attended a pro day without the head coach with him, Mike McCarthy or Mike Tomlin?
I don't know. We got the trackers over the last several years. We'd have to look back at that, but
I don't
I
believe he has. I'd have to
right.
check it, but I don't believe he has. And my question is, why can't Omar Khan just go to a pro day? I mean, usually somebody else goes, be it a scout or a positional coach. So it's not usually just the GM. But why is Omar Khan incapable of going to a pro day solo?
Good question. And then that's a good question for Omar here in a couple of weeks when both him and McCarthy have the pre-draft press conference or what have you. So look, once again, out of selfish reasons, I would have liked Mike McCarthy at those 6 that he had planned to be at, but the fact of the matter is, he's only been to 1, and we'll see what happens at Indiana, and we'll just have to get happy in the same pair of pants that we got upset in.
Yeah, they were at 5 pro days last year, Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin. I'm looking at 2024. They were at maybe another 4-ish pro days together, and it was always Khan and Tomlin in 23. It was also Khan and Tomlin across the board. They went to six or so pro days that year. So Omar Khan, to our knowledge, has never been to a pro day without the head coach accompanying him, which I don't quite understand. You're the GM. If McCarthy can't go, that's unfortunate, but you can still go, Omar. It doesn't beat the allegations that Omar is not as in tune on the football side of things and his background as mainly in Pittsburgh, at least the business side, the contractual side. You have Andy Weidel. He's the scout, the old school route, the head coach, Tomlin, and now McCarthy, who's been in this forever. If Khan kind of wants to show that he's a football evaluator too, then go do some things on your own.
Now, look, do I expect moving forward here Mike McCarthy to be grilled during the pre-draft press conference about tell us what came up that prevented you from going to the pro days? No, I mean you're not going to ask him that kind of thing,
No.
but you can ask Omar. Is there a reason maybe why you couldn't go? Are you opposed to going to pro days by yourself if Mike McCarthy can't go, or something along those lines? But once again,
Right.
where we hyper focus on these things because that's what you and I do. In the grand scheme of things, would have been nice once again to have them there. Yes, but we're not going to be able to judge this after the fact. Well, if they had gone to this pro day, they probably wouldn't have drafted this kid, or probably would have drafted this kid. And look at how that. But we're not going to know the answer to that for a couple of years now. So
This is a point about process.
mhm, mhm.
So
And it does sound like indeed they were planning on going to 6, but for whatever reason they didn't. So we'll have to sit here and guess if the car ran out of gas, or if there were locusts or something like that.
or maybe they got stuck in the TSA lines. Maybe that happened. Or maybe, as you said, though, Aaron Rodgers did pop in and they had demanded both Omar Khan and Mike McCarthy's time and attention, or something else team related that happened behind the scenes. We don't know, but it's certainly worth asking that question. And I assume there'll be a pre-draft press conference with McCarthy and Khan, as there was under the old regimes right before the draft kicks off on draft week. And so maybe they'll be able to address it then.
All right, I'm going to guess that the tux didn't come back from the cleaners is not the excuse.
Yeah, or locust related or anything like that. So anything else from Mike McCarthy that he had to say that caught your attention is worth talking about?
Well, he was asked about his role in the pre-draft process, and I don't have the quote in front of me. Maybe you do. He made it sound like this is the most he's been involved with the 3 organizations. He talked about the time in Green Bay and how, who was it?
Ted Thompson.
Ted Thompson always promised him he would draft a player that Mike McCarthy didn't like, and then obviously he talked about his time with the Cowboys and how all the coaches were involved, basically to some degree. But let's not kid ourselves. If Jerry don't want a guy, Jerry's not drafting a guy, right?
Yeah, Jerry and Steven were driving that bus.
Right. Now he comes to Pittsburgh and he makes it sound. I don't have the quote in front of me, but to me, it sounded like this is the most input he's had in a pre-draft process of the 3 organizations.
Well, I think he literally said that to begin his sentence and then sort of backtracked it a little bit about his time in Green Bay and Dallas, but that was sort of what he was getting at. So, yeah, that's how Pittsburgh does it, and that's how Mike Tomlin did it, and I assume they're going to empower Mike McCarthy to do the same. He's talked about the difficulty of the process of scouting while getting the coaching staff in place, installing the scheme, and getting everybody up to speed on that end too. So I'm sure it's been a difficult and tiring couple of months, but that's being a new coach is like. He's done it before, did it in Green Bay, did it in Dallas, not doing it in Pittsburgh. So he's got an experienced coaching staff, a good coaching staff around him. He's talked about Angelico and Patrick Graham, etc. So that's just part of the job.
Now, look, if Mike McCarthy was 35 years old or 43 years old or 46 years old, and fairly new in his coaching career, but what I'm getting at here is the whole Bill Parcells things. If you want me to cook the dinner, you got to let me buy the groceries too. Mike McCarthy's not going to coach in Pittsburgh for 10, 12, 14 seasons, right?
10 seems about the max, best case.
All right. I mean, I'll be surprised if he goes that far. But I mean, let's look at it maybe 6 or 7. I mean, and if you want, the kind of not turn around, but if you want to start shifting or get out, I think rut was used yesterday during the coaches' breakfast about this team's in a rut. And McCarthy said, well, they did win the division last year. Well, if you want to get out of the rut of not winning a playoff game and making a run at the playoffs, in so many words, I think someone that's been around as long as McCarthy has been around, and a guy expected to come in and get this team out of that playoff win rut or lack thereof, that he should have a lot of say about how, kind of personnel and player that is drafted. Now that doesn't mean they're going to change from some core values of hearts and smarts and character and what is a Pittsburgh Steeler and all like that. But yeah, I think Mike McCarthy should have a pretty solid say, especially with this coaching staff, of the kind of specific player that he's looking for and wants to draft.
Yeah, I think anyone who they would have hired, whether that would have been a younger, fresher face or a veteran coach like Mike McCarthy, would have had that power. I think that's good to allow your head coach to be very much part of that process. I'm sure it's still always going to be viewed as a Steelers decision. The decision makers being Omar Khan and the head coach and Art Rooney II, the owner. But the head coach should have a lot of input and say on who is going to be added to his roster.
All right. What else did McCarthy have to say?
Just kind of touching on the coaching staff again, talking about Patrick Graham and really smart guy, and they worked together before in Green Bay. And McCarthy saying he knows how I feel about the history of Pittsburgh's defense and wanting to keep the 3-4 and generally keep the same structure in place and have a more seamless transition on that side of the football. So Patrick Graham probably not going to make any sweeping wholesale changes to this defense.
Right, and they talked about how some of that terminology and all has been around for since the '90s, obviously, and they, you know, not a lot of that. There's going to be more probably terminology change on offense, obviously, and even though they're going to try to keep things as constant, carryover as they can when it comes to that. But I would, look, he's going to have a starting next week. He's going to the offense is going to be behind the defense, right?
Yeah, I think McCarthy said that's generally how it goes, but he's gonna. I know McCarthy talked about trying to blend his scheme versus some of the same terminology to let these guys be able to pick things up quicker.
All right. What else did McCarthy have to say that was notable, or anything that Omar Khan or Art Rooney II had to say? We hit
From
on the Rooney thing about Rodgers and that, so I don't want to revisit that.
sure. Yeah, there wasn't anything else big from Rooney. He just had a couple of short interviews. Not getting into this too much, but on the Rooney Rule side of things, doesn't Rooney did not anticipate any major changes to the rule. I know there was the story about the Florida Attorney General that was challenging that and believing it violates Florida law, but there's been no actual legal action taken so far. So Rooney said they're going to have a discussion probably with the Florida AG and kind of clarify what the Rooney Rule does and does not mean.
All right, what's the deal with the black seats?
Yeah, I didn't follow it too much. I saw a news story yesterday on the local news. They're going to put in some black seats in the upper deck in the stadium. So there's going to be a couple of stadium changes and renovations.
He said something on it, just too much yellow or gold, or I forget what he said there. What had happened is the black seats are cheaper than than the gold seats, right? I don't understand that. Why are you just mixing in randomly black seats because you don't like looking out seeing nothing but gold seats? That just did not make a lot of sense. But I mean I think the field's more important. He talked about the grass and all like that, how it's out on the farm
Hmm.
growing right now, and it's going to be a different mix of grass and type of grass is being used in several other stadiums. And the league did not mandate that they switch that. It's something that they wanted to do. And obviously, you go back to the report cards and players saying that they don't like playing on the specific blend or whatever of grass. So there's gonna be a new turf at Acrisure this year, and it's busy growing on the farm right now.
Yeah, so hopefully the field will be in much better condition after the harsh grades and just the bad reputation that Pittsburgh's field has had, whether that was Heinz Field or Acrisure Stadium, no matter what you call the stadium, the field has been in pretty poor condition. I know Pittsburgh has the challenge of playing outdoors. It's never going to be great. It's never going to be as nice as some sort of dome down south, but must be better. And I think Pittsburgh is making those strides. We're talking about it very briefly here, just getting a live reaction. Mike Florio has an article up on PFT this morning, just got posted. The headline is Broncos emerge as a potential option for Aaron Rodgers. The only substance here from Florio reading the article, quote, there's talk of the Broncos possibly bringing Rodgers in for a visit. The motivation comes from the possibility that current starter Bo Nix won't be fully and completely back to 100%. when week 1 rolls around, end quote. The Broncos had just talked about Nick's being ahead of schedule from his ankle surgery in the playoff game last year. I don't know what the source of. There's talk of the Broncos bringing in Rodgers for a visit. Florio does not expand on where that talk is coming from. This is the first I'm hearing of it. But Florio is doing the Florio thing of making a noisy headline with Rodgers in Denver.
Yeah, I'm not buying it as is. Bo Nix's leg would have to fall off, I think, before they sign Aaron Rodgers. But is this posturing on Rodgers' end? I don't know.
Boredom from Florio, who loves talking about Rodgers. Because, I
Yeah.
mean, Nix is going to be healthy sooner or later, even if the week 1 timeline is a little fuzzy, which I think will probably make it back for. So what is Rodgers going to do? Play for a week and then sit on the bench all year? It seems really dumb.
Yeah, I'm not buying it.
Me neither. It seems like April Fool's. Florio says it's not. Feels like somebody's yanking his chain over there.
All right, what else do we have?
Anything else from Rooney or Omar Khan? Omar had did we mention the Broderick Jones? I think we did.
Yeah,
The Broderick
yeah.
Jones update, a more promising update on Broderick Jones. I forget the exact quote in front of me, but that he's getting back to work, and certainly was a more optimistic tone than what Khan had said at the combine about Broderick Jones.
Yeah, come get me when OTAs get started. We'll talk more about that.
All right, Dave, anything else from the week at large? At the owners' meeting, some of the rules were passed, including Pittsburgh's proposal to make the Zoom calls with free agents permanent. They had the 1-year trial run in 2026, and so that passed. No surprise there. No major rule changes. You can do onside kicks at any point. Now you still must declare them, but you can do them beyond. The old rule was fourth quarter trailing, only time you could do an onside kick. The NFL can, if there's replacement refs, can basically come down and correct any issues. So if we get to that point, the NFL can step in and not have the disaster of a decade ago with the replacement refs.
All right, I don't want to spend too much time on that. We already knew that pretty much all those were probably going to pass anyway there, and obviously the Browns pulled back their proposal on more than 5 years out trading picks, and not a huge surprise there. Let's talk about. We already talked about the Arkansas quarterback potentially coming in. We've got one other kid that's supposedly coming in for a pre-draft visit, right?
We do. That is Memphis offensive tackle Travis Burke, who's a busy man. Justin Mello's been all over the Burke Pro Day visits, and he's got a half dozen plus of them lined up, including one with Pittsburgh. We don't know exactly when that'll be, sometime in April, and so Burke will make his way to the South Side.
All right, big kid. I went and drilled down a little bit of his tape. Almost 6'8", I think. Mainly played right tackle at Memphis, and does have a little smattering of left tackle and even a tiny bit of guard in there. Looked at most of his stuff, obviously playing right tackle, a guy that really likes finishing his blocks, plays with a nice demeanor, obviously with his size, is susceptible to getting beat around the edge and giving up some surface area in his chest. This feels like a later round, like fifth, sixth, seventh round tackle option. Guy that can versatile, once again, that has played both tackle spots, a developmental tackle, if you will. If the Steelers waited until day 3 of the draft to go get themselves a tackle, feels like he checks the boxes.
Yeah, he does. Feels like he's been a riser in this process. A couple of Memphis kids that could be drafted or in a camp this year, but Burke seems to be the better of the two guys. And so I know we have the report coming on him. I know Ryan was working on that even before this news came out. I don't know if he has anything officially written up in the report yet, but looking at it, it's not published yet. But to give a little teaser, likes his run blocking and carries his weight well. Maybe has to get out of his stance quicker and not the most athletic guy, but has a lot of experience and could be an interesting day 3 name.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a tackle, maybe to throw in your mock drafts in later rounds, potentially him. And the interesting thing is Markel Bell out of Miami has been in for a visit. He's another big boy too. So are they looking for a that we already know arm length and the importance of that, but are they looking for an all around bigger body type tackle this time around.
Maybe a type there. Two is, I don't know if two is a trend, but we'll keep seeing who else they bring in. I think we have half the visitor list that either has come in or will come in, has visits scheduled. And so I think the next 15 is going to be really important to check those first round boxes because of that list, it's really only one clear first round name, and that's Denzel Boston. And so we had the super chat, or not super chat, but the live stream question Monday about who's this team going to take in the first round. And I feel like we're still pretty much in the dark here. And maybe that last piece of information is going to be the most important about who comes in for a visit that might check that first round box.
Yeah, and once again, we'll be keeping our eyes peeled at the Indiana Pro Day, see who shows up there, and yeah, once again, my hope is that we are able to at least get this 30 list built out all the way to 30, and nobody snuck in. That you always hate when you get the list, and there's maybe two guys that were supposed to come in that didn't come in, so you don't have an even 30 there. Yeah, I want to see this list. It'll be very helpful if this list gets fully built out to the 30 that we know actually came in the door.
Yeah, that will be ideal. We'll keep you posted on that. Dave, speaking of pro days, interesting one yesterday, Indiana getting the attention today, but Tennessee had their pro day yesterday, and that was a pretty notable one for their defensive backs, especially cornerback Jermod McCoy coming off a torn ACL and didn't play in 2025 and did not work out at the combine. Pittsburgh had an awful lot of representation at that pro day. They sent at least 3 members of the team in former Steelers cornerback in area and just scout, I should say, Ike Taylor, defensive backs coach slash defensive pass game coordinator Jason Simmons, and director of college scouting Dan Colbert were all in attendance. Taylor putting the 2 notable cornerbacks through drills in Jermod McCoy and Colton Hood, both likely to be first round picks. And so that is about as much attention as Pittsburgh has shown any pro day that we're aware of this year outside of the Georgia pro day in which McCarthy and Omar Khan attended. So what do you make of this?
Well, it and McCoy, the guy that had he not suffered the injury, would probably be a slam dunk first rounder at the very least. Even with this injury, with him back working again, he's expected to go off the board in the first couple of rounds, right?
Yeah, I think he'll be a first round pick. I think he showed his health. He ran 4.38, jumped 38 inches, 10.7 broad. So the tape is first round all day. I'd be surprised if he made it to 21, let alone get out of the first round entirely. So you wonder what the intrigue maybe is there. Is there a trade up scenario? I guess you couldn't rule that out. But then, of course, you have Colton Hood, who maybe would be on the board at 21.
Yeah, it makes you kind of wonder if maybe Hood might be more of the focus there.
Yeah, you never know exactly what to make of it. I mean, Pittsburgh sent, Zach Azani was at the Tennessee Pro Day last year, for example, for their couple of receivers. They typically send kind of more of those. They have a larger presence when there's multiple guys at the same position to check out. But you wouldn't think corner would be highest on the list of needs, given the Jamel Dean signing with Joey Porter Jr. opposite. But you can't ignore this interest either.
Right. Now it'd be interesting to see if any of these come in for a visit here of these final 15 or so.
How much would you consider Hood, let's say if he's there at 21, and let's say that you have Yowane you could consider and Omar Cooper Jr.?
Look, with them signing Dean and having Porter and all like that, I'd be a bit surprised, especially one coming off an injury such as that. If any corner really ended up being the selection.
I would too, but Hood's a really good player and probably has the potential to be a great player. He's a pretty young guy. I think he's just turning 21, really just 1 year full-time starter at Tennessee this year. He bounced around a couple places. Hood did was at Auburn to begin with, went to Colorado. His first interception came in a game in which he replaced Travis Hunter when Hunter got hurt mid-game. And so he was kind of a part-time guy at Auburn and Colorado and then became full-time. Well, he became the number 1 cornerback at Tennessee last year with McCoy being out with that torn ACL. So he's an interesting guy with a lot of physical tools. And Pittsburgh might be playing a long game here and saying, let's get a long-term fixture at corner. And you're in an AFC North where you're facing Chase and Higgins twice a year. And you want to be really well-stocked at cornerback. So how all those pieces would fit would be interesting. Hood can play in the slot. I think a bit of a background there. So in theory, that's something else he could do year one to get some value in playing time on the field. But I just think it's notable whenever they're sending that many people to that pro day.
I think Hood's a better tackler of the two, right?
Um, yeah, I'd probably I wrote the report on both those guys. I would say so. Hood's issue is just that he's raw and he's prone to biting on double moves and still learning the position. He didn't start playing defense until his junior year of high school. And again, this is a guy that was not full-time starter until Tennessee in 2025. So he's just kind of his eyes are a little bad. He's got to be more disciplined. He just kind of needs those reps and needs to make those mistakes and learn from them a bit more. But as a tackler, he's good. He's got 1-2. He, listed, I think he's under 6 foot, a buck 93. If you look on tape, he's a well built guy. Probably drop weight for the combine to run fast, and just be fast throughout this process. So he's a guy that certainly can tackle and can hit.
It goes without saying, both Hood and McCoy are top 10 corners in this class, though, right?
Yeah, no question about top 10. They're going to likely both be first round guys. You could probably say they're both top 5 corners in this class.
All right. All right. Interesting there. We'll see if either of those guys end up being brought in for pre-draft visits here.
If one of them does, really the alarm bell should really start going off that they need to be in play, need to be considered, whether you think it's the right pick or not for pick 21 or potential trade up.
And they brought in Chris Johnson, but he's more of a mid-round guy at this point. Any other corners been brought in yet? And I know Ike Taylor was at the Alabama Pro Day to see who was it, Damani Jackson and who was the
There's
other
another
one?
there's another late round guy, but Jackson's going to be maybe the draft pick from there. I mean, Johnson would probably be at least a second round guy, I think. Let's see who else. They brought in any other corners? Let me pull up the list. It was the Washington kids. You had Ephesians, Prysock, and Takario. They call him Bobo Davis.
All right. They're definitely going to draft a corner at some point.
Yeah, you thought it'd be a little bit later, and now you wonder if it's going to be a little bit sooner.
Okay. And maybe we'll get clues off the pre-draft list, as we said.
Dave, one last draft thing to talk about, kind of a curveball from your friend and ours, Jerry Dulac, yesterday in his chat with readers. He was strongly hinting the team would consider and likely take Oregon tight end Kenyon Sadiq if he was there at number 21. Did not outright say it and was kind of having some fun with the readers in the comments. I think at one point he was asked, given a list of 5 different players who they might draft: Jordan Tyson, McNeil Warren, the conventional names we've talked about. And Dulac said, "Did you say Sadiq?" And something like that. So really hinting that Sadiq could be the guy. That would be a curveball of curveballs for sure. So what do you think about all that, Dave?
I don't.
Okay.
Period. I would be absolutely stunned if this team drafts a tight end with Freiermuth and Washington already in the fold there. I don't see it at all. It's malpractice if they do it.
Let's play the game in which Kenyon Sadiq is a Steeler on April 23rd by the time draft night ends. What is the rationale Pittsburgh offers of why they took him?
Use them more in kind of a big body, wide receiver role, I guess. More, as a possibility of maybe having technically two tight ends on the field, but one maybe that you can flex out and use more as that big body type that McCarthy talks about. I mean, outside of that, I can't see a path.
Yeah, I think it would have to be the idea of positionless football, that Sadiq is an athlete, a receiver, a target, a pass game weapon. You can call him tight ends, call him what you want, but he's a guy that could play in the slot for us and act like a receiver in that regard. But it is hard to think about that in the post-Arthur Smith era, where you have Washington and who you might extend and Freiermuth who you're paying, and then Sadiq. And are you still getting that route runner that can truly beat man coverage? Sadiq, as great of an athlete as he is, and he's a wonderful athlete, really rare for the position, isn't going to scratch that itch the way that maybe an Omar Cooper Jr. could beating cornerback. So it would have to be under the disguise of positionless football. It's Dulac. You take it with a grain of, you take all this stuff with a grain of salt. Take what we say with a grain of salt. But, I know Dulac last year was talking up the idea about Shedeur Sanders. I think back to the Kenny Pickett draft class where he was convinced they were not going to take a quarterback. And if they would, it would be the one late. And obviously that was terribly wrong. So we're just the messenger. We're passing it along. We'll see what happens. No guarantee Sadiq is even there. At 21, he's probably viewed as that mid-first round pick, maybe a little bit earlier. But that's the information.
I think this team could draft a tight end, obviously, at some point, but definitely not in the first round. So I'll be shocked if it happens.
Where did we grade Sadiq? I'm trying to put together our big board of our own grades. I want to see where he came in at. I'm trying to remember where we have him slotted. We gave him an 8.6. I mean, it's on the higher end of our grade. So I guess in theory, if you're constructing a big board, if he was there, would he be one of the top names on Pittsburgh's board from just a grade and value standpoint? He probably would be up there.
All right.
But obviously, you got to consider a lot of factors, and we'll just keep an eye on. Obviously, they weren't at the pro day in terms of sending any decision maker. He's not coming for a visit. That's true of a lot of first round candidates, but we'll just keep an eye on to see if anything else comes up related to him. Anything else, Dave? Feel free. If not, we can move on to some reader emails and close out today's show.
All right, we're coming up on about an hour and a half into this. I'm not seeing anything else that jumps out. I don't know if there's any sightings at Indiana yet. Is there? Are there?
I was just searching. I'm not sure. I think it's 1 p.m. is the pro day coverage today, so I don't believe we're going to get much until this afternoon.
All right, into the email machine we go. John from Utah checking in. We keep going back to a wide receiver in the first round. You guys mentioned Holmes was the last in Pittsburgh. McCarthy is famous for not taking one in the first round his whole time in Green Bay. Maybe McCarthy has changed changed his will in Dallas. Maybe he says it's a need, and there's been so much patchwork to put a receiving crew on the field. I see some good wide receivers on the board, but I'm not sure they will invest in a day one pick. Thank you for all you do. Been listening for well over a decade, he guesses now. All right, John, I don't recognize your name, so welcome to the email machine. If indeed, don't be a stranger there. I think this is just more his opinion here that talking about how the Steelers haven't drafted a wide receiver since Antonio Holmes in the first round, and McCarthy. Obviously, the Packers went all those years without a first round guy during his time in Green Bay. What did he do in Dallas? He took Lamb in the first round, right? What else was taken? Here are the wide receivers, by the way, that McCarthy drafted during his time in Green Bay. CeeDee Lamb, first round guy.
In Green Bay or Dallas?
I mean, Dallas.
Okay.
Dallas. CeeDee, I got the full list here. I compiled all these from Green Bay and Dallas. First round, CeeDee Lamb. Jalen Tolbert in the third round in 2022. Simi Fehoko, our buddy, out of Stanford, was a 5th round pick in 2021. Ryan Flornay, who turned out to be a pretty decent player, hasn't he? For Dallas, it was a 6th round pick in 2024, and Jalen Brooks, 7th round in 2023. So not a large group of wide receivers over those. What was it, 20 to 24? That would have been what, 5 seasons? Only 5 wide receivers taken over there, and only 1 in the first round. So throughout his entire coaching career to date, he's drafted 1 in the first round in CeeDee Lamb. Greg Jennings was a 2nd rounder. Jordy Nelson was a 2nd rounder. Randall Cobb was a 2nd rounder. Devontae Adams was a 2nd rounder. Those are some pretty nice 2nd rounders that he's drafted over the years there. 3rd rounders, Ty Montgomery and James Jones. 4th rounders, Jamon Moore out of Missouri in 2018. So, and then the rest obviously taken after round 4 there. And he took a total of 17 wide receivers in the draft during his time in Green Bay.
Yeah, we'll see. We talked about earlier, McCarthy was saying that he's probably got more work and kind of control and input on the draft process in Pittsburgh than he had in the other places. So a little harder to connect those dots. But obviously there's a track record, and that can't be ignored. Not a lot of receivers taken early. Now, granted, Lamb was a great one and maybe gives you a reason to do it again. So it's interesting. I think McCarthy was talking about the first picks he's ever made in his organizations were hits. A.J. Hawk in Green Bay. Was Lamb the first one in Dallas?
His first let's see.
First ever draft pick in the McCarthy era.
2020, yeah.
Okay, and then I think about it, Mike Tomlin's first ever draft pick was Lawrence Timmons in 2007. So there's You want to get this one right. The first one's been gotten right in some of these new regimes and new coaches in old places or past places, other places in Pittsburgh. So you want to get this one to be one of those Lambs or Hawks or Timmons in a real slam dunk home run. Insert sports analogy here, first round picks.
All right, Arthur Elliott writes in, what are your thoughts on how a guy like Kyle Lewis out of Pitt fits in the Steelers 3-4?
Play off ball linebacker in all likelihood. There's the big question about just is he kind of can play more safety and overhang? Can he play in the box and can he kind of really thrive against the run? And with an atypical nose tackle, kind of more that run chase type, is that the ideal guy for Pittsburgh? Probably a good debate about that, but probably be playing inside linebacker.
Yeah, can he be an every down guy is the huge question with him.
Yeah, he's undersized and doesn't do his best work. He's really athletic, no question about that. But can he play in the AFC North when you're facing Derrick Henry in Baltimore and Todd Monken in Cleveland, who's going to run probably a run first Baltimore like offense with Judkins and in that group, and that's going to be the question.
All right. He also wants to know thoughts on wide receivers Ted Hurst and Jeff Caldwell. Caldwell obviously has been one of the ones in for a visit out of Cincinnati. Hurst, a big. A lot of people saying Ted Hurst could be the end up being the find in this year's draft class when it comes to the wide receiver group. A guy not drafted in the first round, but could end up being one of the stars of this class potentially.
Yeah, he really had a lot of buzz at the Senior Bowl. Hurst did from Georgia State, and Sheldon White was at that Georgia State Pro Day, which is notable when they sent a pretty high level front office executive there. So that's notable. Caldwell was a 1-year guy at Cincinnati, was at Lindenwood for a couple of years and had a lot of success there, and then transferred up. A big height, weight, speed, triangle type a receiver.
Yeah, definitely, potentially. I don't know, Caldwell. Which one will be drafted first, Caldwell or Hurst?
Hurst, for sure.
Yeah. And Caldwell probably an late day 2 guy.
I will check mock draft database. I think it might be later than that. Receivers, especially in this class with so many names, some of these guys tend to slip. And mock draft database is just an aggregate based on the common man's projections, but we use that as kind of a baseline. They have him overall projected 5th round pick, so probably more day 3.
All right. Both those guys obviously fit from the big receiver standpoint, right?
Yeah, no question about that. Those guys would certainly satisfy McCarthy's preference of bigger receivers.
All right, let's take one from Joe Wright. Writes in, hey, David Knox, love the show. I have an ask that I'm not sure if it makes sense, but it does in my head. It probably doesn't matter, and this is a mock draft question. He says, it probably doesn't matter as much 5th round and after, but with the early picks through at least through the 4th round, we kind of assume they're going to make the roster. He says that assumption being accepted, whatever your pick is, does it make sense to list who, if anyone, would then drop from the roster? I see which way he's going here, Joe, with this. I definitely get it, and it's a good point because we kind of, I don't know, did we do it on the last show? I think we did on the last show. What it about mock drafts, or was it during the live stream the other night? I forget. We were talking about mock drafts and putting them together and how
that was
to
the live stream.
Okay, how to go about it and all. And maybe this is a question off of that. He does make a good point here. And look, league wide, kids drafted in the first 4 rounds of the draft have a high percentage, for obvious reasons, that those kids end up making the 53-man roster, right? And Steelers specifically, very, very rarely. Who was it? Duran or
Duran Grant might not have made it at his first camp. I'm double checking that now. He was released September 6th. I assume that was cut down date. I think back to Fred Gibson, I believe Danny Farmer in the early 2000s, also 4th rounders who didn't make it.
All right, so theoretically, it is a good assumption that whoever you draft in the first 4 rounds is going to make the roster, 53-man roster, unless they're on IR or whatever reason. He makes a good point here. Does it make a sense? Because the Steelers over the last, several years, a large selection of their entire draft class ends up making the 53-man roster, right? And I would say, yeah, I think, yeah, if you're putting a mock draft together, at least positionally and where how a guy could stick, in other words, you're probably not going to put a third wide receiver or a fourth running back. Maybe, I don't know. You got the whole question about Caleb and all. I guess what he's getting at, if you're putting a mock draft together and you're getting to these fifth, sixth, seventh round players, should you theoretically in your head make a good argument of why such a kid could stick to the 53-man roster? Now, this year's a little bit different because right now you got three seventh round draft picks, right? And what are the odds of three seventh round draft picks if indeed the Steelers stick with those picks and all three of them make the 53-man roster? I think at the very least, and where Joe's coming from, probably 98% of the people that you put in the mock, you better have a path of them making the 53-man roster. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there should be a path where it shouldn't be there's no way for this guy to make it. That's the Oladokin problem, where there was just no way for him to make it, not even a chance for him to get reps or a chance to show that he's worthy of making it. And they cut him, mid training camp, just let him go find another place, and he had a soft landing in Kansas City. I mean, when you talk about the later round picks, it's just, can they add competition? Can they make your room better? Can they challenge the current group? And do they have the talent to potentially make the roster? And if you can do those things, then you take them. It's not about guarantees and how's the roster exactly going to look like. It's just, can they compete? Is the talent worthy to have a real path and viable path to potentially make it? Let the pieces fall where they may, because either the guy they're challenging plays well and keeps the job, or the rookie ends up taking his job. And either way, you got a guy that's worthy of that roster spot. So, yeah, if you pick 12 picks, they're not all going to make it. Usually, not all the picks make it anyway, because half the time, someone always gets hurt. Will Howard last year, Corey Trice Jr.,
Dante Kent last year got
Kent
hurt.
last year, Calvin Austin his rookie year.
Ryan Watts his rookie season, he injured in preseason, and
his career ended in preseason.
Yeah, Logan Lee, he banged up with something his rookie season.
That was kind of like one of those old school. He's kind of hurt, but not kind of hurt. We're going to kind of stash him. But yes, he was on IR. So I mean, we know that if they make 12 picks, two guys are going to end up on IR at least, and that's going to be that.
Corey Trice his rookie season. The last one, maybe potentially not injured, that didn't make it was Oladokin a few years ago. Quincy Roche in 2021 was a 6th rounder. Did he make the original 53?
I don't think he did. Who beat him out? It was a Daney. Was Ola Daney beating him out back then? Or Tuzo Skipper? Was this Skipper? One of those guys. But point is, yeah, those later round picks, especially in the large draft class, they're going to have their challenges. But it's a new coaching staff. Give guys to evaluate. This team needs an infusion of youth. They have to get younger. They're still an old roster. So as long as you're getting guys that can compete. And my thought on the later round picks is you want one or two camps. You either want kind of the high floor special teamer, the guy that is pretty much what you're getting in this guy, the Tyler Medikeviches of the world, like he's going to come in, cut his teeth, raise the floor of the room and compete, or you kind of want the boom bust guy, like he's either going to flame out or he's going to find it and get a real gem there. He's not one of those two buckets for a real late round pick, one of those 7th rounders. You probably don't take him. That's kind of my approach to those final picks.
All right, Bill Ewan writes in here, holes in the draft. Only holes I see for 2026 are quarterback, wide receiver, guard. He says quarterback is out, so the first round should be one of those two if possible. If not, I do best player available leaning to guard, he says, or leaning to guard, wide receiver, safety, defensive tackle, inside linebacker. He says my order would be Lemon, Tyson, Vega, or best player available. He says if Lemon or Tyson are there, I'm sprinting the card up. If they are gone, Vega is there, sprinting again. If all three are gone, get the best player available that fills a long-term need. So that's Bill's thought on holes in the draft.
Yeah, there's always value in getting a really good player, and Pittsburgh needs to find that a really good first-round pick who is just a not necessarily TJ Watt, but is like an awesome first round pick. No questions. Pittsburgh's hit a home run. We just mentioned Hawk and Lamb and Timmons, something like that. They have not had that since TJ Watt. They've had some good first rounders. Maybe Harmon becomes that. Maybe Fartanu becomes that, but you're not there yet. And so you need to have more of those guys.
All right. Got through all the emails that I see here that are recent here, and we've been trending around 95 minutes or so on these shows. So I think we're about there today. We covered a lot with Mike McCarthy and things coming out of things that he has said. We've addressed some draft stuff here, pre-draft visitors. We will see what happens between now and Friday. All eyes on the Indiana Pro Day and the pre-draft visitor list at this point as we get into the month of April and the draft month. So Alex and I will be back on Friday here.
And by the way, just really quickly, Mike, how do you say last name? Mike Kliss from Denver, the beat writer, says 0% chance of Denver and Aaron Rodgers. So kind of knew that, but just to put a bow on that story.
I've had several good conversations through DMs and all with Mike Kliss in the past, and I really respect the work he does. He's one of my favorite long-time beat writers in the league. So if Mike says it, I tend to agree with him over Mike Florio at this point. So good info to wrap up the show on there. Okay. In the meantime, until Friday, you can follow me on Twitter at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. What are your thoughts on height and weights and all of these wide receivers and Mike McCarthy? Who are you Xing off the list of maybe first or second round potential candidates with wide receiver based kind of loosely on the things that we talked about and Mike McCarthy has talked about when it comes to wide receivers there? What are your thoughts on the quarterback list? Should this team bring in Drew Aller? Another focus, just a quick, you can quick comment on what percent of probability do you think at this point now that the Steelers will draft a quarterback at some point during this year's draft? A lot of different things to chime in on. theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you want to donate to the cause, SteelersDepot.com, hit the donate button. Also, if you want an ad-free version, you know how to get it. Go to SteelersDepot.com, hit the ad-free button, and follow the directions that way. Alex, let's go Bucks. Let's go Pens. Pens getting themselves back in this thing. The Bucks have 2 wins now, looking to win a series against Cincinnati later on today. So a lot to be excited about if you're a Pittsburgh sports fan right now, especially with it being draft month. So until Friday, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.